Here on the Amazing Art Show, Funky Flower Sculptures. Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Amazing Art Show. I'm your host, Angie Beam, and today we are going to be making some fabulous flower sculptures. You're going to need some really weird stuff today, so get ready. Here's your list. You are going to need a piece of wood. Mine is like 7 by 1. Yours can be a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. It doesn't really matter. You're going to need dad or mom, somebody, to drill a hole for you in the center. This was my largest drill bit that I had. And you are going to need clay. If you want to get a self-hardening clay, you can get a self-hardening clay. If you want to do the polymer clay, you can do the polymer clay. That will work fine too. I'll kind of show you what both of them look like as we get going today. You are going to need acrylic paints. You are going to need some gesso. We've talked about gesso before. That's the white stuff. It kind of just preps the area whenever you're getting ready to add color to it. So you're going to need some of that. You're going to need beads. The chunkier, the better. Bright colors. If you don't have big chunky beads, you can actually make some, and we'll talk about that too. So I brought some of those. Brushes, of course. You are going to need some wire cutters and some wire. So I've got copper wire, and then this is probably just an aluminum wire, but it's in a color. The other strangest thing, this is how this whole project started. My faucets in the bathroom were leaking, so I decided that we would do new faucets, and so we had to take everything out. So I had this copper tubing, and I was like, oh, that's really cool looking. I wonder what we could do with that. So sure enough, this is kind of where the whole idea started. So if mom and dad have replaced faucets and they've got any of this hanging around, it's great to get. You can also get big rolls of it at the hardware store. It's not too expensive. So you just need a really small little piece. And I think that is all that we need today. You might want to get, I'll be using a little bit of some crackle accents and maybe some glossy accents. And you also might, I just found a couple of these little bitty wooden letters. You might want to do something like that as well. And I also have a little bottle cap. So you might want something like that too. All right, okay, so we are going to get started, and the first thing that I want you to do is we're going to prep. We're going to go a little bit backwards. Go ahead and prep your wood, and so by prepping that, I mean that I want you to put the gesso on it, and then you're going to need to let it dry. So I've already gessoed mine, so I'm good to go there. And then you're going to need to start building your flower shape. So I would start working on the top part first. And you want, obviously, your petal shapes in the center of your flower as well. I'm going to use some self-hardening clay. And we've talked a lot before about different methods of, using your clay. There's a slab method, there's a pinch method, coil method. Probably your pinch method is probably going to be your best bet as far as this project goes. So if I were you, I'd start out with kind of a golf ball size of clay. And you can actually do two things. You can either start pinching and pulling off this direction, or I just went and I pulled, about 5 little shapes off of there. And those are going to be my petals. And then I need to come back in with what I want my center area to be, the center part of my flower. And you're going to need to kind of create a base for your flower, so I'll explain that in a second. All right, so you've got, this will be kind of the base, which means that's what we're going to be attaching everything onto. All right, so I'm going to start on my petals. Whatever kind of flower you would like to make, I did this lesson with some of my private art lesson kids, and they made all kinds of crazy looking flowers. And because this is obviously not going to be very realistic, so sky's the limit as far as your imagination and what you would like to do. So I'm going to do, we've talked before about you score, which means you just kind of rough up the clay, which is what I did with this little tool here. And then you slip, which is basically just some watery kind of clay, and you push it on really, really well. And don't worry too much about getting it into the shape that you're going to get it into before you attach it, because once you do all that scoring and then you push it on there really, really well, it usually gets pretty distorted. So don't worry about it. You can kind of go back and reform it just a little bit. All right. So I'm going to, this one's a little bit bigger of a petal, but that's okay. So I'm going to keep attaching my petals. You also might want to consider, don't forget to score both pieces. Score your petal end and then score your base end. You're going to need to create some kind of a center for your flower. How detailed you want to get with that is up to you. You know, as far as creating any of the stigma or the little things that kind of come up out of the middle that help pollinate the flower, it's probably a good idea not to do those because they will break off. If you wanted to, though, you could maybe make some little holes, and then later on you could come in and maybe do some wire in there, or you could do wire with some beads, or you could do, you know, pipe cleaners. Something like that would work really, really well. All right, so I'm going to get this last one attached, and I've got some space left over, but once I kind of shift everything around, I think it'll be okay. All right. And as I work, I'm going to actually kind of adjust this a little bit. Pull this together a little bit. And you can see it's kind of getting a little distorted with me messing around with it. But once I've got my pieces on there, that's when you kind of actually start forming your flower shape. So I'm going to start working on the petals. You might want to make the petals where they will, you know, sit, kind of raise up. And one of the things that my students had a little bit of trouble with was they would get it, you know, into the position that they wanted it to be in, but then as it would start to dry, or actually not dry, I guess it was taking too long to dry actually, they would start falling. So let's say that they kind of had them up kind of like this, where they're raised up. They would start falling as they were working. So we were talking about sometimes with clay, the clay will be really, really moist, which is good because it's very malleable and it's easy for you to manipulate it and make it do the things that you want it to do. But it has a tendency to kind of be lazy and it doesn't want to hold that position. So if you run into that problem, I would suggest that get the whole thing built, kind of just keep putting it back the way you want it. And then at the end, whenever you're ready for it to start drying, you can kind of prop some tissue, newspaper. I think we actually use some beads to prop ours up so that it stays up into the position that you want it to be in. All right, so I'm going to put the very center of my flower in there. And this is also a good time, once you get it all built, everything is how you want it to be. I want you to also remember the underneath part of your flower, all right? There is the calyx part of the flower, which is, you know, where the stem comes up and then it connects to the bottom of the flower. And so you want to kind of create that. And usually you also have the sepal, which are like the little petals that kind of come down and they kind of protect the flower. So those are things that you might want to either consider building onto your flower, or I'll show you a little bit more later what I did with mine. I actually just kind of painted mine on. So, you know, my sepal is painted on because I just thought it's, you know, it's going to be easy for it to break down underneath there, especially with this self-hardening clay. If you were doing a clay that you were going to, you know, put in the kiln, might be a different situation, but if you're doing self-hardening, or if you're doing the, what is it called? The polymer clay, then you probably want to just paint those things on. All right, so I'm going to kind of put this to the side. I'm going to put it up here so you guys can kind of see it. And because I want it to stay up, I'm just going to take some little pieces. It doesn't take very much. I'm just going to tuck them up underneath there. And then as it starts to dry, and it'll start to dry pretty quick, it's going to keep those raised up. It's already, this side's already starting to kind of relax. So just, it'll keep it up in the position, and then as it starts to dry, and it happens pretty quick that it starts to kind of stiffen up, then once it starts to stiffen, you can actually pull those little pieces out because it's already done its job. All right, so I'm going to move, oh, I forgot to tell you this. Any decorating that you want to do on your flowers. So if you want to come in and you want to do, I'm going to use the end of my brush. You want to do any kind of lines that you want to put in there, any kind of patterns that you might want to put in there. If you want to do, you know, some lines kind of in the center coming out, now's the time to go ahead and do that, because once it starts to dry, you're out of luck. So you got to make sure you do those good details now. All right, so my flower is going to dry, and I'm going to move to this one that I've already been working on, and it's already dry. So it's very hard. And I was talking to you about the sepal, and that is here on the bottom. And so I just painted those little bitty leaf shapes kind of on the edges and on the bottom, all right? And I'm gonna make that part green. And then the top part of my flower, I get to make, you know, any color I want to. Now, really quick, our flower that we're going to be building, everything is going to end up going onto this copper piece, all right? And these are very whimsical, abstract kind of flowers. So we're adding some things onto your flower that aren't naturally on flowers. So you're going to be creating, for me, the other thing that I want you to do is I want you to create basically like some beads that are going to fit onto your copper pipe, all right? They can be shaped like leaves. They could be just shaped like a bead. You can make them, you know, any kind of form you would like to do, geometric shapes, freeform shapes, obviously, if you're doing any kind of leaves or anything like that. But the one trick to your clay is once you get it into the shape that you want it, all right, you need to create the center part. So we started by just kind of stabbing a brush in there. And you want to go to the largest part of your brush, and it does kind of start to lose its shape a little bit, so once you get it on there, kind of reform it a little bit. And then of course you're going to want to pull it back out again, smooth off your edges. Now the trick with this is that right now your clay is really moist, all right? But as it starts to dry, it's going to constrict. So the hole that you have now, even though it may be a great size to slip on here very easily, when it dries, when the clay dries, the hole is actually going to be smaller than what it is now. So the one thing that I really talked to the kids about was you want to exaggerate the size of the hole. So instead of it being just right for it to fit on, which seems like that would be logically the right thing to do, you want to exaggerate it and make it even bigger than it needs to be. All right, so if you can look here, I've made the hole a whole lot bigger than the end of my copper pipe. So when I slip it on here, I've got lots of wiggle room in there, okay? So then you're going to let these dry. I would suggest, you know, you want to do, you know, 7, I would keep it an odd number, but you want to do, you know, 7 different types of beads, make them all different and make them all unusual. I've got one here that I'm going to do as a leaf shape. And the one other thing that we ran into as we were working was you don't want it to be too thin, because as you're working and you're slipping it on, sometimes they tend to break. So you want to make it a little bit thicker than you kind of think you normally would. So you want it, you know, you want it around this kind of thickness here. And now is the time, if you want to carve in the veins of the leaf, now is the time for you to do that, all right? So go ahead and add the details that you want to add, and then know that you're going to need to poke a hole in it somewhere on your leaf. And then know that once you get the hole on there, you need to exaggerate the hole by making it a little bit bigger than what you really think. And then you're going to put those to the side and let those start to dry. All right, so that's pretty much it as far as the clay part goes. All right, so now let's go back to where I was before. I've got my flour, it's dry, I'm ready to start adding color. You could do color two different ways. If you want to put gesso on it that we talked about earlier, like the stuff that you put on the wood, it will make your painting go a whole lot faster. Or if you're okay with adding a couple different coats of paint, that works too. I usually just do a couple coats of paint. So do your flower any color that you would like to do. And you're going to need to do a couple different coats of it. So down here on the bottom, this is probably about 3 coats or so. All right. So you're going to add your color, and as you're adding, do not forget to do the back and the underneath part. So you're going to have to work around if you're going to do, you know, those teeny tiny little leaves that we talked about. The sepal area, you're going to want to work around that. Now, as I'm working, you want to make sure that you don't have any globs. So you want everything to be a smooth, solid coat. You're not going to be able to get a nice, solid, have it look perfect with just one coat of paint. You're going to need to do several coats of paint. So you're going to work on that and get that part finished. And it dries fairly quick. So you can actually, you know, do your petals, work on that for a little bit, and then maybe go and underneath work on the sepal part underneath. And then as that's drying, you can come back and work on the very center of the flower, kind of go in stages. And then it goes really, really fast that you can start to add your color. So we are going to assume that you have gotten all of your pieces painted. And of course, you know, this is TV, so it goes a little bit faster than what it would normally in life. So this is not going to take you just this 30 minutes that you're watching the program. It's going to take longer than that because you're going to have to let things dry and all that kind of good stuff. So when you get finished and you've painted everything, you also need to paint those beads that we made. The geometric shapes, the freeform shapes that we made, you're going to need to paint those as well. And then you're ready to start assembling everything. I'm going to get this last little coat here. All right, not perfect, but it'll work. And that up there. Okay, so now it's time for you to start kind of assembling things. And you can either go ahead and paint your base before, or if you would like to, you can paint it afterwards. It doesn't matter. I would personally paint it before. So let's just do that super quick. As far as your base goes, you know, you might want to make it green like the grass, or you might want to make it look like dirt. You might just want to make it some weird funky color, and that's fine too. And you want to make sure that you get your edges as well as the top, and you will probably need to do 2 coats of this as well. Something that my students did that looked really, really neat was once they did theirs like it was the green grass. Once they got that on there, they let it dry for just a little bit, and then they came back and did kind of some darker green on it to kind of look like the blades of grass, and it looked really nice. So I'm going to get my edges. And I'm going to get these edges too, make sure I don't have any globs. And then, where did my, this is not normally the way I apply my paint, but I'm trying to hurry. All right, so you are going to finish painting your edges. And the next thing that you're going to need to do is you might need a little bit of Elmer's glue. Sometimes it fits in perfect, and then sometimes you need a little bit of glue. You're going to actually put your copper tubing inside the little hole that you made. All right, So I'm going to turn that here. And then I'm going to insert my copper. Now when I first got this, it was a little bit of a curved shape, but not too much. But I came back in and I actually curved it a little bit more. And you are going to place that firmly down inside of the hole. And I've got clay on my hands and it's getting in my paint. All right, next thing that you want to do is you're going to start threading your beads on. So you can go in any order that you would like to go. I'm going to take this out for a second. You can go in any order that you would like to go, but go ahead and thread your beads on. And my beads are smaller than they're supposed to be. This is before we discovered my trick. So I'm having to work on them a little bit. All right, and then keep threading. And I told you earlier that I was going to show you kind of the difference between what it looks like when you do the polymer clay. It's not a whole lot of difference. It just looks a little bit different and it's a lot lighter. So that might be something that you might be interested in doing, is doing, you know, 2 different kinds. I'm going to do my clay ones because I like those the best. And if you happen to get it and it's tight, just kind of thread it on. So you just kind of twist it and move it down where you want it to be. And I think I'm going to stop there. And the last part that I'm going to put on, this is actually going to be like the C-pull. And I'm going to twist this on. All right. Now I'm going to put this back on here. And those other beads that are down at the bottom, just let them fall. They go wherever you want them to go. And then it's time to put your base on. Now, one thing that I did not tell you at the beginning, and I probably should have, you need the same size hole that you have down here in your base, you're going to need to put on your flower. So once you build everything, just take it and stick it on there so that it makes the size hole that you need. And then you can actually dig this little piece of clay out. You don't really need to make this one bigger than what it actually is. For whatever reason, it just kind of worked last time. And you may need to put some glue inside there whenever you go to attach it. This one that I made fits pretty well, so you can just kind of stick it on there. All right, now, if your piece kind of wibble wobbles, all right, there are a couple things that you can do. You can put some glue down inside there, or you can also, there were several of us that took a little bit of clay and we kind of shoved it down inside there, and that kind of helped to keep things straight. So that clay that I just pulled out of here, I'm actually going to stuff a little bit of it down in there. And that kind of helps just give it a little extra support. All right, now you've kind of got the basic parts finished. Now kind of is the fun part. At this time, you can use your paints that you've already brought. You could do, you know, if you've got any kind of a 3-dimensional paint, you can do that as well. You might want to go back and do, you know, dots, patterns, designs, anything like that. If you would like to, you can also do that kind of stuff down here on the bottom as well. So I'm actually going to, I think I'll do a few little bitty dots. And while I'm doing that, let's go to the quote for today. Happiness held is the seed. Happiness shared is the flower. John Harrigan. All right, we are back and we are ready to do the fun stuff. This is up to you, so you kind of get to decide what you want to put and what you don't want to put. I've already started with my green wire, and I just went around and around and around, and then I'm coming up over my beads, and I'm starting to add those colorful beads that we were talking about. So I've got some turquoise and I've got some orange on there. And then as I come up, you can either continue with the green and go all the way up, or if you wanted to, you could come back in with the copper. And I just love the color of the copper, so I'm actually going to go back down and I'm going to add some copper. And when you first put it on, you kind of have to loop it over itself so that it stays in place. So that's what I'm doing now. And then once you get it on there, you're just going to go around. You can make, I'll show you how to do a little shape that we did a second ago. It's pretty cool. Go around like this. I'm just going up over some of my beads that I already had. I'm going to go back down again. I've got some, out of polymer clay, I made some other little beads. And so I'm actually going to thread this on. I think I'll thread it this way. And I'm going to bring it down close to where I want it to go. But I want it to kind of stick out off the flower and be just real silly and whimsical. So I'm going to take it, I've got like a little loop right here, and I'm going to just twist this. And then as I'm twisting, you want to be careful that you don't accidentally break your clay, but just give it a couple really, really good twists. And it'll kind of hold it there. It's probably not going to hold it out straight for you, so it's kind of going to flop down, but that's okay. And then I'm going to continue to come up and around. And I've actually got two choices here. I've got, remember the little wood pieces that I was showing you earlier? I've got that. I've also got my bottle cap, and I put a little bee inside of it for beam. That's me. And I'm going to, I think I'm going to use this. So I'm going to thread it on and then just go around a couple times. And then I am just about finished. Now these are super fun, very whimsical and kind of crazy. If you wanted to go back and add, you know, you could make little beads, little small beads, kind of like my leaf. You could do little birds, you could do, I've got hearts, I've got leaves, or leaves, that's not a leaf, that's a heart. I've also got, and this just came off of a wind chime that I had at my house, but I just love the little bird. You know, this is something, you know, you could wire this on to where you've got a little bird on there. Would be absolutely fantastic. I love that. I think I'm going to do that. All right, boys and girls, we are done for today. Thank you so much for joining us for some amazing art.